Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello, Morgan Streetman, Pat George, two fine gentlemen. I'm Roxanne Wilder. We're happy to get this show started and bring, I wish we had good news to bring on the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, anymore with everything that's not going on in the world, I mean, all we've got to talk about basically is the coronavirus, right? Mm-hmm. At 24/7.
I was just telling Roxanne, I was checking the traffic because we have a problem on 75 northbound around Ocala. So I'm looking at the signs to see what it's going to say, and apparently it's an accident blocking a couple lanes, but the signs didn't say that.
Yeah.
I could see through the cameras what it was, and it's raining up there. The signs read, for coronavirus information, go to corona.gov. That's what the signs are saying on the interstates. No traffic information, corona information.
That's it.
And while you're driving, since there's nobody else on the road, right, just go ahead and check out some coronavirus information while you're at it.
Pull it up on your phone right now.
No indication yet whether that may have led to the accident that is just past the signs, right? Somebody was, seems like an appropriate time.
Don't text and drive messages, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, it is interesting out there. We saw over the weekend some folks start to try to get a little bit back to normal, at least up in Jacksonville. Did you see that, where they opened the beaches?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And boy, as soon as they announced it, I mean,
they were out there.
Hundreds of people, maybe even thousands of people just flooded out onto the beach.
Yes.
I thought it was interesting how they have said some things are okay to do on the beach and other things are not okay to do on the beach. Did you hear about that?
I did see that.
Yeah.
The okay activities are walking and surfing, and is fishing an okay activity?
Fishing, yep.
Yes, and then what you can't do, you can't just sunbathe.
You can't sunbathe. Like by yourself, you can't take a towel or a chair out there and just sit. That didn't make any sense to me.
No, it could get tiring, too. You just have to constantly be moving.
Can you search for seashells in the surf?
It's kind of like when you don't want to actually rent one of the cabanas. You know, you have to every time you have to keep getting up and moving when they say, "Sir, I'm sorry, you have to." Oh, these are rentals? I thought they were free. I didn't know.
We know what that feels like now. Yeah.
So, but I thought it was interesting how quickly, folks. I mean, people are desperate to get outside and do something. And particularly, I think they're desperate for some kind of return to normalcy. So they want to do some of the things that they remember doing from before this whole coronavirus quarantine came into place.
I want to know why it's okay for big box businesses like Lowe's, Home Depot, and all of that, where they're packed, lots of people.
Yeah.
It's okay, but other smaller businesses, it's not okay.
Isn't that interesting how we've broken our society down into so-called essential businesses and non-essential, and then how are those lines drawn? You know, because we've talked about this some on the show. I mean, things like grocery stores, okay, it's pretty easy to understand that is essential. You got to be able to get to the food. But what about churches? Churches are not essential. So you can have gatherings, and I'll tell you, people are not, perfect about observing social distancing in the grocery stores, and I don't necessarily think it's all that big of a deal. But, I mean, I've noticed, I've been in grocery stores. Now, I haven't been as much as I used to go because I tend to, nowadays, buy more stuff for a longer period of time, put it at my house so I don't have to go all the time because, you don't want to be going out as much as you used to. I don't know. I mean, this whole coronavirus thing has been awfully confusing, I think, and it's been really hard to find some solid information about what are we actually dealing with here because there was so much hysteria about it. I mean, so much hysteria. And for a time there, they made it seem like, this will be the end of the world. Now, even at their worst projections, we were talking about well under 1% of the U.S. population dying, but that's still obviously millions of people we're talking about. And at one point, they were talking about over 2 million people would die from this virus over, a couple of month period. And that sounded pretty bad. That sounded pretty darn bad. And a lot of us, I know, were very worried about our parents and our grandparents and, anybody in our families or lives who are a little bit older. We're all very concerned about. We all heard the stories, and we thought, it's basically certain death is coming for them if we should happen to get this thing. And so, I think it's pretty natural that people started to shy away from doing as much outside and in the public as they used to do. But, the reality hasn't borne that out really over time.
Years ago, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, China had that ban where you can only have one child, and then they lifted it, and they said, okay, now you can have more children. I had somebody tell me, do you think that this could have been a purge toward old people in China to try to get rid of? I had somebody bring up that.
That's
theory.
an interesting thought. I mean, that you would think if that was the case that, well, I mean, it's hard to know what actually happened in China, right? I mean, that's one of the big things. What really happened in China? Is it the numbers that they've released officially, or is it many, many more people than that?
And there are also, again, we don't know the origins of it in China, but I heard another China theory, just reminded when you said that, Pat, that maybe China did have something to do with this on purpose so that they can look like the hero and have all this medical equipment and then get their leverage with the United States. Now, again, I want to reiterate, these are just theories. We don't know any of this. This is just conjecture.
Yeah, just speculation. But I do think it's interesting how now this type of speculation is being allowed. It's coming to the front. I mean, we have people talking about this. We have even papers, national papers, for instance, the Washington Post, talking about some of this stuff going on. Like when the U.S. Embassy actually visited that Wuhan Institute of Virology lab in Wuhan, China, and they actually sent back warnings. This happened in 2018. They sent back warnings to the United States about, hey, this place is not completely safe. They don't have the right safety protocols and the right management protocols in place. And this particular laboratory is a prime candidate for something to escape from it. So that notice went out in 2018. Now, remember, they've been studying just at that lab. That was one of their particular areas of study was bat coronaviruses at that lab. In fact, the lady who was running the studies, the doctor, Xi Jinping, she was known as the Bat Woman because that's essentially what her entire career was built on, was the study of these bat coronaviruses. And this particular bat coronavirus, which, assuming that it is somehow originated in a bat, I think it's got 96% genetic identity with other bat coronaviruses. So if this is some kind of a lab-modified virus, or it has some part of lab modification involved in it, I think it started out as a bat coronavirus, and it came from the horseshoe bats in the Yunnan province about 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. That much they believe they've discovered and documented. Now, there's a lot of reasons to look into some of that and wonder, because a lot of people then go, well, obviously then it came from bats to humans. It made the jump. And I think, we've talked some about this on the show before, and I think it's worth, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, really taking a look at it, because you cannot just rely on the headlines. And that's really the point that I'm trying to get to, is that just a few months ago, what I think is a pretty interesting news site, which is Zero Hedge, was permanently banned from Twitter for suggesting that this virus came out of that Wuhan Institute of Virology. And now, 3 months later, we've got, and I'm going to have to put quotes around reputable news sources, but we've got places like Fox News, we've got the Washington Post, and a whole bevy of other news sources that are saying, hey, maybe this came out of that virology lab. And it's like, do you think that's possible? I'm sorry for applying just a little bit of common sense, but, could that have possibly been what happened? We've talked about the way that these labs, these virus labs, and we've got them here throughout the U.S. as well, although we don't have them in every city, but we have them, in different places in the U.S., and we study these things, and how there's a history of the viruses finding a way to escape.
Good thing you're not in China saying this. You could disappear.
I would disappear right away. You'd never hear. There'd be no more. The Morgan Streetman show, no such show. You would never hear from it again, And that's what they did to a bunch of people who tried to blow the whistle on this. But you're looking at what happened in Wuhan, and, this particular kind of bat doesn't even live around there. And the whole idea of the bat soup was kind of a farce, actually. It came out that they didn't serve these kind of bats. And, in fact, bat soup wasn't popular in Wuhan, China, that the photos that we all saw of bat soup, like at the mall, those actually came out of Indonesia. So I thought that was interesting. But really, the more interesting point on why this didn't make the jump most likely from bats to humans is that there were no previous attempts. And that's what they always see, is they always see previous attempts of the virus to jump from animals to humans, because it takes a virus, it never gets it right. And we're personifying viruses a little bit here. They're not that smart. but the virus never gets the mutations right and makes the jump effectively the first time. It usually has to try 5 to 10 times before it sticks. So when it makes a jump from a bat to a human, it doesn't work the first time, or maybe the human dies before passing it on, and then it has to go again and try again, quote-unquote, try. And so what actually you see is you see some antibodies in some of the population, and they've tested for that already, and they found there are no antibodies to this particular bat coronavirus in the population of bat hunters in Yunnan, China. So that indicates that if this virus made the jump from a bat to human, it made it successfully on the very first attempt, and that just doesn't happen.
Oh, if only we could air what we talk about off air, right?
People would love to hear that. That's why we can't run the Periscope, that we would all forget, and then it would get out what we actually think. Well, I do think it's interesting, though. I mean, here's something in Fox News published just a couple of days ago. It's got Brett Baer on the byline, and he's no out in front, at the cutting edge of the news type of guy. I mean, he's definitely a lead from behind kind of news guy, in my opinion. And I just wanted to read this first line to you because I think this is really fascinating that now this is the news story, and this is as of, basically Friday of last week. There is, now I'm quoting, there is increasing confidence that the COVID-19 outbreak likely originated in a Wuhan laboratory. That's the first line of the story. There is increasing confidence. Now we're confident about it. I didn't even know we were allowed to talk about it. When did that change? All of a sudden, you're not only allowed to talk about it, but now we have increasing confidence.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, and then it goes on, and it's not just Americans and American interests that are talking about this, because I also thought it was pretty interesting. If you've ever heard of the German newspaper Bild, it's a pretty big newspaper over there in Germany, and they actually ran an op-ed piece written by their editor-in-chief, and it's called What China Owes Us. And I think it's fascinating. You read some of what he wrote there. He says, I'm quoting, this is the German editor-in-chief of Bild, says, your government, talking to the Chinese, says, your government and your scientists had to know long ago that coronavirus is highly infectious, but you left the world in the dark about it. Your top experts didn't respond when Western researchers asked to know what was going on in Wuhan. You were too proud and too nationalistic to tell the truth, which you felt was a national disgrace. You rule by surveillance. You wouldn't be president without surveillance. Can you imagine saying this to...
Who's saying this?
This is the editor-in-chief of a German paper, The Bild, who is saying this to Xi Jinping, the emperor, essentially, of China. He says, you wouldn't be president without surveillance. You monitor everything, every citizen, but you refuse to monitor the diseased wet markets in your country. You shut down every newspaper and website that is critical of your rule, but not the stalls where bat soup is sold. You're not only monitoring your people, you are endangering them, and with them, the rest of the world. And he goes on, because that wasn't the entirety of the article, but we see there, again, the seeding of, and we don't know what happened. We don't know where this virus came from. We're just trying to follow the evidence. But
Will we ever?
Well, we see the seeding of that story again, that it somehow came from bat soup in the wet market. Now, remember that particular wet market, of the original 41 people who were studied by the Lancet who had this Wuhan virus, the coronavirus, of the original 41 people, 14 of them had zero contact with the wet market. So it's actually thought that the virus didn't come out of the wet market, but that it went into the wet market and infected people there at the wet market, and then kind of spread out from there. So now that particular wet market is not very far from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, we don't know for sure that somebody was going there and visiting, although you can look on the internet, and there are people who are named as being some of the researchers that were involved in this bat coronavirus program that they were running out of that lab, the one we were telling you about last segment. And they even have identified, some people have identified on the internet, and of course, again, we have to say we don't know if that's true or not. It makes for interesting reading, though, but they've identified somebody in particular as being patient zero. the very first person who got it. And, how could you possibly go about getting it in one of these research laboratories? Well, if they're not following safety protocols, like the U.S. Embassy reported back that they weren't back in 2018, or their equipment is defective. And that's another interesting thing. I mean, there's pictures out there that you can go out and find of the seals on the refrigerators where these viruses are held. And the seals are not, they're broken. The seals are not in good shape. And you just go
No
ahead.
quality control there.
Yeah.
Let's say we found out concrete evidence it came from China. Without a doubt.
Well, we
evidence.
know it came from China.
Well,
I say
but
that.
we figured out how, guaranteed this is how it happened. China still wouldn't admit it. And what would it cost China?
Well, yeah, what are we going to do about it, right?
Yeah.
What are we going to sue them? And
We won't pay back our debt?
No, well, wouldn't that be nice? Debt jubilee.
Do we still have a timeline of when this was supposed to have first, the patient zero? What's the hypothetical timeline of patient zero in Wuhan, China?
I think it was late November, although I've seen timelines going back as far as September of 2019.
Okay.
The answer is we don't really know because China has not identified a patient zero who's the first person who had it. That'd be the natural first thing you would do when you're investigating this would be try to, okay, where did it start? Let's find out the very first person who got this and spread it to other people. But they have not done that, or if they have done it, they've kept the information secret. They haven't shared it with the world as to who they've determined was patient zero. So without that knowledge, we can't say for sure when it was.
I just Googled, and it says the first signs of the coronavirus began on December 31st. No, not
That's
true.
not accurate.
Not
No,
accurate.
no,
But
no.
that's Google for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely not accurate. And then, of course, you got questions about, and you got to have questions. And I guess what I would, look, we only have an hour a week, so we can barely even scratch the surface on a lot of this stuff. And with the way the news cycle moves, we can't, it's hard for us to even talk about things that are a week or two old. But it's important when you're viewing the news to try and maintain some perspective out there and try and remember a little bit of history, remember what's come before it. That's why I'm pointing out things like the shift in the story, like how in January when Zero Hedge came out and said, you know what, this probably came out of that Wuhan Institute of Virology. Here are the people who were working on that particular kind of coronavirus, et cetera, and they were decried the internet over for daring to post these crazy conspiracy theories. And by the way, that word just gets used now for everything. I hear that everywhere. Any story that doesn't agree with the accepted narrative is a conspiracy theory, and that's just baloney. It's not a conspiracy theory just because it doesn't agree with the accepted narrative. But that's the way they use the term. That's the pejorative use of the term, and I'm sure you've all heard it out there. We see it all the time now. We see that term thrown around, and it's generally just to discredit whatever thought process. And, I don't think it's very fair the way that people aren't allowed to think for themselves and apply their common sense. Well, I say they're not allowed to. You can do whatever. Thankfully, you can still basically do whatever you want to do. They haven't quite totally locked us down yet. But in terms of freedom of thought, you can still basically do whatever you want to do. But the media and all of the inputs that you're looking to on these issues discourage it heavily. And you have to kind of swim against the current mentally. You have to have the fortitude to say, I'm not going to think the way that you want me to think. I'm just going to think about this. Doesn't mean I have to accept it, believe in it, etc. But I'm going to think this thought through. And I'm going to apply my own common sense, my own judgment to the situation. And I think, it has to be a balance. Because the situation that we've gotten into is sort of the tyranny of big data, or the tyranny of the models, or the tyranny of the algorithm, where we're in a situation where you can't question what you're told the big data tells us. Big data tells us this. If you say, well, gosh, that doesn't make any sense to me, you get attacked, and you're not allowed to even think that way. You can't apply your own common sense, your own judgment, your own experience to the situation, and I think that's a real mistake.
As we're having this conversation, I'm trying to find a legitimate time for when this actually started, the real date. And I came across an article that says conspiracy theorists have conjectured that the lab is the origin of the COVID-19 coronavirus. That was less than a month ago, that article.
Well, there you go. You see what I'm saying? Now, one of the things that I saw, and I'll see if I can pull up the article because I had it, and I don't have it right in front of me, but one of the things I thought was interesting was that the guy who actually was the discoverer of HIV, and he was actually awarded a Nobel Prize in Medicine, and I think it was 2008. Oops, now that's going to put us on to YouTube. Okay. Anyway, I think it was in 2008 he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine, but he's actually come out, Luc Montagnier, and I may be saying that with a little bit too much affectation. I don't know. What? How would you say it? Luc Montagnier? Luc Montagnier.
Luke M.
That's the southern way to pronounce it.
He's come out and said that, look, there is something inserted in this virus from HIV, from human immunodeficiency virus, which is the virus that causes AIDS. There is something from HIV inserted into this COVID-19, this coronavirus, and this could only be done by a lab. So this could only have happened in a laboratory setting because nature doesn't do these type of insertions. That's from somebody who, talk about appealing to authority or appealing to experts. He should know what he's talking about. He discovered HIV and won the Nobel Prize for it.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. We were getting into some of the attributes of the COVID-19 virus, how it behaves, and some little intricacies that may lead to one to believe that, yes, this had to be actually made somewhere.
Well, yeah, and isn't it interesting that somebody of the stature of the doctor that discovered the HIV virus, and back in 1983 discovered HIV, that's the virus that leads to AIDS. Professor Luc Montagnier, he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2008 for discovering the HIV virus. He says that the SARS-CoV-2 virus is a manipulated virus, that it was created in a laboratory, and he believes it was accidentally released from that particular laboratory, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, according to what he says, and, one would think he might know, they were trying to work on an AIDS vaccine or an HIV vaccine in that particular laboratory, and as part of that, somehow they may have gotten HIV fragments into a coronavirus, which they were trying to use as the transmission virus for the vaccine. Now, I don't know if you remember this. We've explained on the show before how they've got these new vaccines. They're not like the old vaccines that you might think of. The vaccines that you might think of when you think of a vaccine is they put kind of a wounded version of the virus in the vaccine and they shoot it into you. And because it's wounded, your body can kill it really easily. But then once it kills it, it can recognize it and it develops the antibodies. And so then if you were to actually go out there and be exposed to the virus in its native format, you wouldn't get it because your body would already know how to recognize it, fight it, and eliminate it. So that's the idea of a traditional vaccine. You give you a sort of a damaged version of the virus so you can know what it looks like. Your body will know, your immune system, and will be able to identify it and kill it when it sees the real thing. That's a vaccine. But that's not the kind of vaccines that they're developing today. The new vaccines are these DNA vaccines, which involve having an actual different virus, not the one that we're trying to give you immunity to, but a different virus, insert into your DNA some kind of a character string that's going to cause your body to automatically produce the antibodies. So you see, that's a different way of getting, supposedly, to the same result. And these are called DNA vaccines. So one would assume if they were trying to use the coronavirus to maybe implant a piece of the HIV virus into DNA so that you would somehow create antibodies to it. That was the way that they were working on the new AIDS HIV vaccine. And according to Dr. Luc Montagnier, that's what they were doing at this Wuhan Institute of Virology. And I just think that's really interesting. He says, with my colleague, biomathematician Jean-Claude Perez, we carefully analyzed the description of the genome of this RNA virus. Indian researchers have already tried to publish the results of the analyses that showed that this coronavirus genome contained sequences of another virus, the HIV virus or the AIDS virus, but they were forced to withdraw their findings as the pressure from the mainstream was too great. And he says that in order to insert an HIV sequence into this genome, so the genome of the coronavirus, molecular tools are needed, and that can only be done in a laboratory. A little bit of good news, though, and it's interesting because this matches up with some Israeli research that's come out about how the virus sort of runs its course, and it's already starting to show signs that it's run its course. A little bit of good news from Dr. Montagnier. He says, nature does not accept any molecular tinkering. It will eliminate these unnatural changes, and even if nothing is done, things will get better. But unfortunately, after many deaths. So he's saying the coronavirus itself, as it propagates throughout the population itself, is going to, well, it's going to rewrite its own code to get back to what it originally was versus what it was with this insertion from HIV. Now, again, we don't know any of this stuff. That's, so it's, but these are people who are experts, obviously highly credentialed experts with a track record of success. And he's willing to put his credibility on the line to say this in public. So, it causes me to wonder, maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to what he's saying, and maybe it's not just a crazy conspiracy theory. And in fact, it's interesting because in that particular interview, they asked him about, are you just a conspiracy theorist? Basically, one of those gotcha questions. And I wanted to read you what he said about this because this flows with what we're talking about. He says, conspirators are the opposite camp, hiding the truth. So he's saying that he's trying to bring the truth forward. It's not about whether this is a conspiracy or not a conspiracy. We could look into whether or not it was some kind of a conspiracy for China to release this. Pat, kind of in keeping with what you said earlier, maybe it was a conspiracy to clean out their elderly population. Maybe it was a conspiracy to introduce the virus into the rest of the world, because China was in the process of losing a multi-decade trade war with the United States that it had been up until President Trump's time in office. China had been winning that trade war very effectively. They were very effectively defeating the United States in that trade war, which we didn't even acknowledge was a trade war until President Trump came into office. But, it's interesting how much of what President Trump has said and what he ran on, particularly with respect to China, has been proved true. About how we need to manufacture things here in the United States. We need to retain our intellectual property and technology here in the U.S. Because remember, part of the deal with China is if you want to manufacture something there, they require that you give them the intellectual property, and then they take it and appropriate it. They steal our technology just to allow us to manufacture there. So now that we've heard all these stories about some of the personal protective equipment and other things, the tests that have come from China with respect to this coronavirus, what a large number of mismanufactured, ineffective tests and protective equipment has been distributed and sold throughout the world of Chinese origin. It only emphasizes all the more that we need to be producing our own products here in the United States as much as possible. And this is part of what they're talking about as we go now and we try to open up. And it's so interesting to me. We're talking about opening up, but now they've just announced in Florida as of, I think it was yesterday or maybe it was Saturday, but they just announced over the weekend that they're going to keep the schools closed for the rest of the year. Now, how can people go back to work if the kids aren't in school?
Right.
I mean, the way that we've got our society running now with generally both parents working Not making any judgments about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you've generally got both parents working in most families. And so school functions as daily childcare. And if you were to actually have to pay for childcare, for a lot of people, you might as well not even work because it costs almost as much to pay for childcare as you make from your job. Mm-hmm. So you really can't afford to pay for separate childcare.
And that could go on for a month. That could be a month of people back at work and working from the office.
Right.
I mean, hopefully businesses will be willing to work with their employees and say, hey, you've been getting the job done at home. And I know you still have your kids to take care of. So hopefully people will be willing to work through that month because it'll be another solid month.
Well, and I think people, it's interesting, a large part of the population doesn't even want to go back to work. I think that's interesting. I mean, it's not that they don't want to go back to work, but they want to keep working from home.
I've heard a lot of people say that.
They don't want to go back to the office. Mm-hmm. Something like 40% of the people who've been, and I had to put quotes around it, working from home, because I think you can work from home, that's for sure. Sometimes I work from home, but I think in a lot of people's cases, they're less efficient when they're working from home. And you got to particularly think if you've got your kids in the house with you. I mean, they're demanding, Roxanne, you know this, they're demanding constant attention
Depends
from
what
you.
age they are. Yeah, mine, no, it's not efficient to work from home.
Did you bring it up last week about the attorneys that were working from home and they were staying in bed? And they weren't dressing?
The judge. The judge got on them. Well, I guess apparently because, now we're doing some court hearings and things using this Zoom program, which I think is fascinating. We know it's got major security flaws, but it's still been adopted by the Florida court system. I mean, even the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments by Zoom. So I just think that's fascinating. We already know about a lot of security flaws with it. Imagine about the ones we don't know yet. But, it's been adopted. It's what people are using. I'm glad we got something to use at least. And I've done quite a few Zoom chats, although I've yet to do a Zoom hearing. But apparently some attorneys are not really taking to heart the fact that, there's a visual and, there's a component of this where you can be seen. So I guess there were some attorneys who were actually doing court hearings from bed, bed in their pajamas.
Shirtless, in bed, still in their pajamas. Sure. Laying down in bed with their head on the pillow in court.
I heard a funny story, just to share this. It may not be that funny to other people, but it was sort of funny from a friend of mine was telling about one of these conferences that he went to. And apparently one of the guys that was actually speaking at the conference didn't realize the video was already live to everybody.
Oh, no.
And
love those
had
mishaps.
On a shirt and tie and a jacket, but apparently had to stand up and get something, wasn't wearing any pants. And, I don't think I think he's wearing underpants, but he wasn't wearing, a full office outfit, tops and bottoms. And apparently sort of accidentally flashed, although not a direct flash, but accidentally showed, I think, probably more than what he intended to show. But, to me, it's pretty commonsensical to, care about how you present visually. It's such a visual world that we're in. So I can't imagine myself showing up for a court hearing in anything other than a shirt and tie. Now maybe whether you put your jacket on or not, I'm probably neutral on that one, but I probably put my jacket on. Why not? You want to make the best impression you can. But okay, so this is already going on. So, but anyway, we'll get back to work. I don't know how soon it will be. They're talking about these phased reopenings, and I know in some states they're already starting. Here we've had some starts with opening the beaches. Now schools are going to stay closed, but we've opened the beaches.
You have issues right now with people's health where they're scared about COVID-19, about catching it. So much to the point I was talking to a hospital administrator in the Midwest, and he said that he's seen just such a bump up, in suicides, stress-related, calls. And then also the other side of that is people who are going into cardiac arrest and then being so scared about going to the hospital that they're not going to the hospital until it's too late.
Yeah.
Appendix, same kind of thing. Someone let their appendix go and it was just too... So now there's this... We're living in a world of such fear. We're afraid to act as we normally would. Our instincts are all messed up. Yeah, they've definitely, and I don't know who they is, but, put quotes around it, the powers that be have kind of got us in this, tuned, is when I say tuned. They could almost drive us from emotion to emotion, fear to dread to all these things, and it just depends on what kind of media information they're putting out there and what the talking heads are saying. Because we sort of go from these peaks to these valleys
of our emotional feeling. We're going to talk a little bit more about this.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, but before we go out there, we've got to talk a little bit about the antibodies test. That's not available widespread at all, but they've been doing tests throughout the country in pockets of areas.
Yeah, and it's not widely available yet, but it will be pretty soon. Within the next couple of months, we'll have U.S.-made tests for antibodies that will be fairly widely available. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, we don't have enough for everybody to go and get a test right away, but we will have enough for millions of people to very quickly start to be tested. And then, of course, as the testing capacity improves over the month, we'll have millions and millions more. But some of the tests that they're already doing on antibodies are showing some interesting results that may indicate that there's a lot more folks out there that have had the coronavirus than what we realize. And I think that's fascinating. Of course, if that's the case, then that drives down the lethality of the coronavirus because a lot more people have had it. So as a percentage, the number of people who have died from it is a lot lower maybe than what we realize. But we don't know all of that yet. It's probably going to take another year or so of studying this and looking at the outcomes to know really with certainty what the truth is.
All of us here probably have had somebody say, I think I've had it, but not all three of us have a lot of friends that have had it. Mm-hmm. For sure.
I do know someone who got really sick in December with the whole I feel terrible and my dry cough. Mm-hmm. And he took the antibodies test and he did have it.
Yeah. I mean, we all, like we've all shared that we've all known people who have said to us, that they think they had it, and they've got some pretty convincing reasons why, including some of the different symptoms that are coming to maybe be known as part of it. Like Roxanne, you had mentioned that, now they're saying foot sores is maybe a sign of coronavirus.
I even had someone in my family member, an adult, 60 plus, in December, early December, got hand, foot, and mouth. And I'm sitting in here doing air quotes because hand, foot, and mouth, you're not diagnosed with it. You go to the doctor, they look at your hands and your feet, and then you get the diagnosis. Well, it's largely just affects children. Mm-hmm. And everyone I told, this person had hand, foot, and mouth, and they're like, that's impossible. Adults do not get hand, foot, and mouth.
Yeah.
Well, now because they're saying that the sores are on the bottoms of the feet could be an early symptom. It presents differently all over the place. But there was a rash of hand, foot, and mouth cases in the Tampa Bay area at the end of this 2019. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Adult cases. Who's to say that those weren't related to that?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. It's interesting how this virus presents so differently among so many different people. So I certainly wouldn't, I wouldn't say with certainty, they definitely didn't have it, because I think we really don't have a good handle on how quickly this spread and exactly what the symptoms were. And obviously there were a lot of people who didn't have major symptoms. Massachusetts General has done a study up in Massachusetts. They took 200 residents of a particular town called Chelsea in Massachusetts. 64 of those 200, so that's a little bit over 30%, about 32%, tested positive for the antibodies. So a third of the people tested in this particular study in Massachusetts had the coronavirus already. Now, obviously, if that extrapolates out across America, that's 100 million plus people that have already had it. We don't know if that would apply or not. But there's a Stanford study that just came out that suggests that they think the number of people that have been infected with the coronavirus is 50 to 85 times higher than the documented number of infections. So there again, you're talking, tens of millions of people have already had this, if that's the case. And we don't know. We don't know if that's the case or not. We don't know. One other study that's just come out recently, and these are all very interesting, was done at a Boston homeless shelter. They tested 400 homeless people in Boston, and of those, 146 tested positive for the coronavirus. So, that's a pretty large percentage, not getting up quite to half, but, it's a significant percentage of those folks. Now, guess how many of those people were showing symptoms? I give you a guess.
10.
You guessed too high. If I only give you one guess, you're supposed to say 0.
Oh.
0.
0.
0 out of 146 people showing symptoms. So there's so much we don't know about this, but we will come to learn this over the next months and years. And one day we'll be able to do a post-mortem on this situation. And I just wonder if all those people who are now talking about some of this in a different tone are going to go back and apologize to some of the people who speculated on it early on and turned out to be right. I bet you they're not.
Right. No, I mean, there are so many people who have speculated that one thing and then it completely turns out another. I do have to share a quick story with both of you guys. I was talking with a friend of mine and he said, Roxanne, I know that we have to keep people safe. But for every person who says we have to keep everyone safe and not get coronavirus, you should then start driving around at 10 miles an hour and wearing crash helmets everywhere you go, because that's comparable numbers to how many people die in car crashes each year.
That's right. Well, almost 50,000 people a year, this was as of a couple of years ago, 2018, commit suicide each year. Now, what's the number going to be now? I mean, I don't know what it's going to be. I think there's a lot of despair going on, fear and despair going on as a result of this coronavirus and the economic distress that we've faced as a result of the shutdown, which is the supposed cure for the coronavirus. Of course, they didn't need that in Sweden. They didn't have to completely shut down in Sweden, and they're showing even a better virus curve than what we're showing here in the U.S. So, it just makes one wonder about some of this. But if we don't switch gears a little bit,
get out there.
Yes,
we're going to miss our out there. And this was I believe it's put in the New York Post, but I saw a news article and I thought, wow, wouldn't that be interesting? Because certainly we've talked about this on the show before. But what if we had, Joe Biden is going to pick his vice presidential running mate, they say, in about the next month. Now, let's listen to what he has to say about what kind of Democrat.
An Obama Democrat.
He's an Biden-Bama Democrat. You catch that, right? It's Obama-Biden, but he's an Biden-Bama Democrat, according to him. And by the way, I've got an entire show card. I'm holding it up here to verify with our producer and my co-host that I've got an entire show card of Joe Biden clips to play. We're just waiting on the right day. We're just waiting on the day we can get past this coronavirus and I can play all of these for you. But wouldn't it be interesting? He's already said he's going to pick a woman. Now, he hasn't committed to picking a minority woman, although that's certainly in play with the Democrats because of the way that they focus on identity politics. Now, what we saw in the New York Post is a very interesting supposition, which is we see Joe Biden's declining mental health. We can see that playing out right in front of us every time he gets on camera. I almost feel bad for the guy. But if he was to pick Michelle Obama...
Oh!
I know, Pat George, I know, but if he was to pick Michelle Obama as his vice presidential candidate... that would up his stature, I think, a little bit. People like her. Not all people. But then what I heard in the New York Post, and this was what was so interesting to me, is on January 21st, the day after his inauguration, what if he then, under the 25th Amendment, tearfully resigns and says, I'm just not able to do it anymore, and Michelle becomes president, and then she runs 2 more times? We could have 12 years of Obama. I'm Morgan Streetman. That's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.